You've said a number of times as I've come to the satsangs over the last few weeks, the expression getting richer for the experience. And I was wondering, what's getting richer for the experience?
Right. That being that you really are. A number of times I have also said in this Advaita teaching they only talk about there is the person is an illusion, and then you get rid of that and there is only that homogeneous oneness. But there is a being. It's not the person we think we are. The person is just a role, momentary, that we are playing in this theater of this world. But at the base of it, there is a being. There's absolutely no problem about it. The problem is that we are creating that image and then creating that wall, and along with it that sense of separation. That inside the wall, that's me, separate from whatever there is outside. And that sense of separation is the delusion. But there is that center of perception, connected with everything, one with everything, and yet it has its own uniqueness, its own beauty, its own way of experiencing that oneness, its own way of unfolding in that experience. That may be a bit strange for you since you are a Buddhist. But then when the Buddha talks about the no self, he doesn't talk about that. He talks about the person as self.
He's talking about not self, not no self.
Not self, not no self.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
There's Ajahn Chah would say, well, there's no self, but there's not self. There's not a self, but there's also no self.
Yeah.
Not a no self. I don't know. It's just not self. It's not
just
defined.
not, huh?
Yeah. It's not defined.
Yeah.
He's not saying no or yes.
Essentially what you are, what is, doesn't change. It's that changeless oneness. And yet in that oneness there are myriads and myriads and myriads of beings.
And do the beings in some way inform that oneness?
Do they inform that oneness?
Yeah, does the oneness get richer for those beings?
Right. I mean, the whole is getting richer for the experience. It's sort of that one reality is eager to experience itself in new and new and new and new ways. That's for what this whole crazy story is about.
Okay.
And that experience keeps on expanding, and there's no limit to that. And as a being, as long as we are holding on to that notion, I'm a person, I'm separate, I'm like this, I'm like that, I have this history, I have these expectations, the me and the others, then it's always a painful struggle. If we give that up, then the attention comes back to the source, to that basic oneness of existence. But then the experience of that starts to unfold. It's not that at that moment that's the end of the story. That's really the beginning. And the experience of that will unfold and unfold. And all that we have experienced to this point is somehow stored. The power of it, the wisdom of it, the energy of it, just also the memory of it. And that's all there as a capital, as a wealth. It's not that somehow, because of some cosmic accident, we got split off from that oneness, has to suffer hell, has to struggle hell, until finally we join again, and then we are again where we started. In a sense, yes. That we are again aware of that oneness, in that sense we are again back where we started, but much richer. We bring back trophies from hell. Yes?
A question related to that whole self-other, and that I come from a bit of a psychology background. In the West, we have a lot of these labels that become part of the identity, anxiety or lots of labels in DSM. At the same time, there is knowledge of the personality there, and I'm wondering how useful is all that to this practice?
On its own level, it's very useful to function sanely, in society.
But it can be used to trap an identity. I have this condition.
You just have to know that it's just a role you are playing. That's not what you are. If you identify with that whole set of labels you have, then you are in trouble. But somehow or other, you're appearing. You're appearing as a certain personality. Somehow or other, you have to behave. Somehow or other, you have to spend your time. But if you have that awareness that what you are doing, this story you are going through day after day, it's just a story, it's just a role you're playing, you stop identifying, you stop thinking that I am like this, I'm having all these labels. It's part of the role, so as long as you're busy with the role, you play your role. Like an actor on stage, plays the role, but deep down always is very aware, I'm not that role. Curtain falls, the story is over. So on the psychological level, they may be perfectly justified to somehow deal with that. If there is disorder, to somehow try to balance that out, to be capable of functioning. But don't stop there. As long as one is psychologically disturbed, there is no chance of detaching from it. So it makes sense to bring a bit order there, that you can relax. And in this relaxation, don't stop. Don't stop with the idea of I'm a sane person, I'm a relaxed person. But come back to that which is aware, that sense of presence, which is prior to the person. When you say I, immediately you're touching that something. When you say I, without a thought, not I'm like this, I'm like that, there is that most familiar sense of presence. It's always there, but if we are busy, we are always overlooking it. Most of the time, it's completely unconscious, but still it's there. Without that, nothing is. Without that, there is no perception, no thought, no emotion. You can't wriggle a finger without that. First is that pure sense of being alive. When you say I, you're in touch with that. But then the mind comes and we immediately add all that stuff to it. So by all means, help the people to find their mental balance, but you for yourself, you can always be there. It's just a role you are playing in this theater of this world. What is that makes the experience possible now? Come back to that source of existence. And it's always there. It's not something we have to reach after a long journey, after a long time of practice. somewhere in the future out there beyond the stars. It is that which makes here, now, every experience possible. So the goal you're looking for is now. And we somehow just have to bring the attention back to that. And as long as we're losing that conscious touch, we just have to bring it back again and again and again and again until it sticks.
But the one thing I was just wondering, so I've been reading in talks, Ramana Maharshi's collection of things, and there's often mentions of extinguishing the mind. With the mind, the world arises.
Yeah.
And it's almost as if he's talking about that the objects of awareness, have to still down until there's no objects of awareness. It's just, space or beyond beyond space itself. And I'm wondering, this idea of extinguishing, can the mind be extinguished and yet thoughts are going on, and there's the five sense objects, and it's all going on, but the attention is resting in the place of awareness, and so there's not grabbing onto anything. It's just experience happening and being known. Would that also count?
It doesn't count.
As the mind being extinguished in good old freedom?
Are you also getting points for that?
Yeah, I mean, but can you call that, in a sense, liberation?
I mean, it's just a way of talking about it, to extinguish the mind. It's always, when we talk about that, it's a way of talking about something that you cannot really talk about. That's a paradox. We talk and talk and talk, and you cannot really talk about. And yet, as long as the mind is busy with so many things, it helps to grab the attention on the level of the mind and point. But that's all we can do. And trying to quieten the mind, trying to reduce that which goes on is a very helpful exercise to be aware now. But there's not really such a thing like a mind. It's not that somehow eventually you are going to find it. Then you can grab it and extinguish somehow. Kill it. There is that capacity in the human form to form consciousness, to put consciousness into reasonable thoughts. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's beautiful. It's creative. The trouble is that instead of it being used on its own level as a tool where it belongs, where it should be, it has become so all-pervading that it's the boss, that compulsively it goes on and on and on and on, continuous chatter. Now I'm doing this, now I'm doing that, yesterday this happened, that happened, tomorrow maybe I'm going to do this, what is this fellow thinking about me? It goes on and on and on and on. And that habit is what creates all the problems. And so for that it's useful to become aware, to try to keep quiet, and when you try to keep quiet, you become aware how you are not quiet, and then learn to detach from that. Distinguishing the mind simply means to stop that compulsion to think all the time. But then that tool is still there. If the thought is appropriate, then you think. And then you think when it's necessary, and then the thought is done, the situation is gone, you can keep quiet again. Ramana also was thinking I remember that he was asked, but Bhagavan, are you still having thoughts? And he said, no, usually I'm not having thoughts. And then that person said, but then I'm see you reading. When you read, you must think something. He said, yes, of course. When I read, then I'm thinking. But usually I'm not having thoughts. And then the person is still not satisfied and said, then I see you talking with all these people, then you must be thinking something. And he said, yes, of course, when I'm talking, I'm thinking. But usually I'm not having thoughts. It's not that somehow, eventually, you just cannot think a thought anymore. It's just that you get rid of that compulsion to continuously analyze everything, me and the others, and make like a sport reporter a continuous commentary about everything that is happening in your life.
But in a sense, that can be just going along like its own little stream. If you're not hooked on to that, that can be doing its thing.
If you are not interested in that, then that starts to quieten down and eventually cease. But still, you can pick up a line of thought and think about it for some time and then think,
And drop it.
okay, now that's enough.
Where do thoughts come from?
Where do the thoughts come from? They come out of that same source, like your consciousness comes, like your capacity comes to take a breath. That
Like a sound arising,
that-
a thoughts arising, the mind senses it.
living, conscious existence that you know so perfectly well, that everybody knows so perfectly well, but not like we know an object, we know it by being, but overlook it all the time. Everything comes out of that, and the capacity to think comes out of that. First is that pure consciousness. Traditionally they have separated into 4 steps, like until you speak. But it's just an artificial separation, it's a flow and change. But first is that pure consciousness, and then it's like it's forming a bit a cloud in that pure consciousness, a potential of a whole subject that comes up, but you don't think thoughts at that moment, but it's there like a whole potential of a whole big story you can start to think, and then if you let it come up, then it starts to form into thoughts and blah 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 blah, it goes on, and then eventually it forms into words and you talk. And when you start to keep quiet, first sometimes you keep your mouth a bit shut to become aware of what's going on in the mind. Then when you listen to the thoughts and slowly that calms down, you become more and more aware of whole subjects, whole potentials of stories that come up, and already there you can just drop it. Instead of thinking, okay, I'm going into that, you feel it's there, it want to come, it want to wash over you, it want to overwhelm you, and then you just drop it. How does it rise? How does a wave rise in the ocean? It just so happens. All this talk about extinguishing the mind, killing the mind, or getting rid of the mind is just a way of talking about it. Catching the attention of the sadhak, trying to become aware of what's going on in the head all the time, what's going on in the psyche, and then learn to detach from that. Learn not to get pulled into it all the time.
I guess to be specific, what I'm wondering about is, do the objects of experience, the 5 senses and the mental objects, do they need to actually cease for there to be, I mean, that when they do cease, that's the unexpressible,
Right.
I guess. But to be free in relative reality, can we be free? and there's still the objects going on.
Right. Of course, you can be free and the objects are
You're
going
just not
on,
attached to
but
anything.
it helps very much if you have such experiences where it disappears, where you become aware, you're fully alive, aware,
And nothing's there.
and nothing's there. But it's also an experience. It's an aspect of reality, and it's not that you have to get stuck there and cannot more come out of it. That comes, is there for some time, and then it goes. But these kind of experiences help very much. That you get another perspective, that you are getting detached, because you become aware they really are not as real as they appear to be. All these sense perceptions, all these objects we are perceiving, we most of the time don't question their reality. And if you have this kind of periods in between where they simply not rise, you become much more aware they are not as real as they are appearing. You are becoming aware like waking up from a dream. While you were dreaming, everything appeared to be so real in the dream, then you wake up, oh, it wasn't real, it was just a dream. And then you become more and more aware that this waking story is not that much different from the dream in the sleep. It's not that much more real. It's a bit another time scale. It's a long, drawn-out dream. But it's not as real as it appears. So it's not worth to be taken so serious all the time. It's not worth to make such a fuss about it all the time. Not worth to suffer for it all the time.
Is there sort of a tipping point going towards that perspective? I can kind of get to a point where I can shut off the thinking mind and just kind of let it be and just be with whatever's happening, and I can kind of go in and out of something. But in terms of, there's still someone who is experiencing. And I feel like I can get glimmers of something else, but and you know, I'm still going in with the who am I, who is experiencing this, who, and, you know, and it feels like there's this sort of wobble, and I'm not quite sure how to
go
give it that little
beyond that. How to make it burst. yeah.
And I know it's also not really something I can do
That's the
myself
thing.
either.
That's the difficulty for the mind to accept that actually you cannot do it.
Yeah.
And yet you have to do something about it. If you are just not doing anything, you just keep on the same painful, sad story, being locked in that little bubble of delusion of being separate. So if you don't do anything about it, that simply perpetuates itself all the time. And yet, you cannot really do it. You cannot make that bubble burst, but what you can do is make yourself available. And that's exactly what you're doing with your inquiry. And you just continue
Okay.
making yourself available. Look, here I am. That's all we can do. Here I am. And then, whatever that is, will eventually manifest.
So the question just stays the same, just focus stays the same, just keep on keeping on?
All we can aim at is that pure state, that state of pure consciousness, pure life force, pure love, that quite complete state. It's still an expression, it's still a manifestation, but that's what we can aim at. And aiming at that is what I'm calling making yourself available. And then eventually somehow your attention may be sucked in so deep that you just don't lose it anymore. But you can't do it. You can just make yourself available that this can happen.
Okay.
Okay, what to do? You can't force that, you can't control that, but you can always put that invitation out. What we can do, we can very effectively prevent it.
Yeah.
By being always very concerned about our own little personality, by being always very concerned about what do they think about me, am I going to do tomorrow, am I going to be successful, blah 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 blah. All that focus on that me is very efficient in preventing it.
Yeah.
So we can do a lot to prevent it.
Yeah.
And as long as we are doing that unconsciously, we cannot get around doing something about it. What we have to do is not to somehow transcend into a new state. What we have to do is not somehow to create reality. What we have to do is somehow become aware what we are doing all the time unconsciously, what a tremendous effort we are making, what a tremendous energy we are spending to create our own misery all the time, and then learn not to do that anymore. That's what we have to do. And it may take a short time, it may take a long time. All we can do is keep going.
Yeah.
The more we are really sincerely fed up with suffering, the more that sincerity is there to really be sincere about it, to really go about it. It's not a difficult thing to do, but we have to do it. The difficulty is to somehow convince ourselves that it's worth the trouble to keep doing that much, to keep catching the attention where it's lost all the time, scattered all over the place, and somehow collect that conscious energy, that attention, and direct it back to the source, to that which makes the experience possible, to that which we are touching when we are saying I. Somehow or other bring the attention back to that. That we can do, that much we can try. How much we are successful every time we are trying, that also doesn't lay in your hands. But whether we go about it or not, that little aspect does lay in our hands, and that somehow we are asked to fulfill. There's no point in simply saying, Advaita teaching, you are already that, so don't worry. As long as we are worrying, can tell yourself, don't worry. It's only the mind. As long as we are creating the pain, as long as we are creating the suffering, it's there. Even if we tell, oh, it's only the mind, it may give you a moment of respite at that moment, but still, that habit that sucks the attention always on that level and creates the same scenarios all over again and again and again, creates the same pains all over again and again and again. Somehow that habit has to be broken. If we want to be free, if we want to be at peace, if we don't want to suffer, we cannot get around that part of the job. Making yourself available. Inviting that inner beauty to manifest itself. To whom am I speaking? I'm speaking to you as a being trying to activate more what is already there, to become aware how the attention is taken away from that being and caught up in a story, trying to awaken that sense that it makes sense to come home instead of always wandering around. But then when we use words, then somehow it's catching the attention on the level of the mind. That's where we have to catch the attention. That's where we are creating the trouble. Here, now, there is no trouble. The timelessness of the present doesn't suffer. Trouble is always in what we are creating in the mind. And as long as we are caught in that, somehow we have to catch the attention on that level, use that same mind that creates all the problem to bend the attention back in the right direction. That's all we can do with the mind, and then we have to let go. We can, but then often we try to reach truth with the mind, try to get it, try to understand it, try to hope that if I hear it enough, then eventually it makes click in my head. And it cannot happen. If we think we understood, we are wrong. Then we just create a new delusion. Oh, now I know the truth. Oh. Then I have just gotten a glimpse of something, but it's just a pointer. That same mind is engaged in creating all this. That same mind can be engaged in catching the attention and directing it back to its source. But that's all we can with the mind. We can understand a lot of useful stuff. We can understand the psyche. We can understand how we are creating tensions. We can understand how we are functioning. If we look at it honestly, observe it, we understand more and more how we have created our own suffering. That understanding is very useful as a starting point, as a point to help us loosen up. But then all the teachings, they have one aim, to give a pointer in the right direction. And then we just, somehow all we can do is let go. Shut up, finally. Keep quiet. No teaching has ever told the truth. No teaching has ever defined reality. The followers of certain schools of teachings, they always are busy trying to prove that their teaching is the best, the highest, the straightest, the truest. There is no such thing. That which helps you to turn the attention in the right direction, that teaching is good. And for one person this functions, for another person that functions. It's not that there is a highest teaching. If you are aware of that, then when you read Ramana's talks, when you read teaching, when you hear teaching, you stop being there with the mind trying to grasp the essence of it, trying to grasp the reality of it. You rather use it and try to open the heart to that space where the words have come from, where the teaching has come from. Then, if you hear teaching like this, if you read teachings like this, the teaching can be helpful, can be a bridge to help us to cross over to that side. But as long as we think we can grasp it, we can finally understand it fully, then we are always running around it. Then we are really standing under. When we are understanding, we are standing under. I'm talking to you as a being, at the same time I'm trying to catch your attention on the level of the mind. asking that attention to come home, here now, to that one point where we possibly can touch reality. There's only one point. That's the timelessness of the now. Here, now. All else is in the mind. 1 moment ago, it's just a memory. It doesn't exist. It has no reality other than a memory. We may give it a reality. We may feed our vitality into it. We may be emotionally attached and create a whole big story out of the past and give it a life, a reality, but it doesn't deserve it. It's just a memory. It doesn't exist. There's only one point where we are touching reality now. That now is so totally different. It's so totally a different category. A moment ago, it's a memory. A moment to come, it's an anticipation, an expectation. But here, now, it's alive. Only here, now. And this here now is not a point in time. Time is continuously flowing. If you put the finger on the now, it's already the past. But there is that sense of presence that doesn't flow away. And it's like time is flowing and touches for a moment that sense of presence and comes alive. And then it flows on. Like a river flows on and on and on. You're sitting on the bank of the river. River is always the same and yet it's different all the time. So is the time-space continuum is always the same and is continuously changing. But there is this situation that appears here now as real, as alive, just because for a split moment it's in touch with that sense of presence. Then it's gone, and it's just a memory. It has no reality other than a memory. It's only now that you're touching now. Somehow, once we understand that much we can understand, then we can use that understanding to catch the attention and in one way or another bring it back to that sense of being conscious, of being consciously alive now, of being consciously conscious now. How we are doing it, it doesn't matter. You can do self-inquiry, you can just consciously breathe in, breathe out, relax. Or the devotee who is more responding to the devotional approach, if the devotion is sincere, more and more the heart is opening, more and more that divine presence is felt. And that divine presence that the devotee feels is the same that one touches when he's doing self-inquiry. Who am I? It's not even difficult. We just have to go about it. As long as the mind creates the old habitual troubles, we somehow have to go about it tirelessly. Not just 5 minutes or 10 minutes or half an hour in the morning or the evening, and the rest of the time you forget about it. It's a full-time job. It is very, very helpful if we have every day some time where we have nothing else to do, where we can put our whole undivided attention simply to that. But then it's good to bring that attitude, that awareness as good as we can in all the day's activities, whether we are alone or in a crowd, whether we are sitting quietly or walking down the road. Just categorically, the moment the memory comes. The moment we become aware how much the attention is again in conflict, scattered all over the place, how much we're creating contradictions in the mind. Simultaneously, I want to go left, I want to go right. I want it, I don't want it. That's what the mind is doing all the time. The moment we become aware, catch the attention and just turn it 180 degrees around. And we may just be aware of that a few seconds, and then it goes again. But these few seconds are very precious. And if we do it again and again and again, that accumulates its own momentum that eventually is stronger than the momentum of the habit that creates always that apparent reality in which we are so terribly caught with the mind.
Just when you were talking about devotion and God and how the West has perverted that name, I did have a sense that I've had a guard against the when people say God and awe. There has been this guard, and it's like the same block against resting in the presence.
Right, and then we grew up in a society with all that moral.
I wanted things to be so intellectual. And
Right, you have to be a good boy and then you go to heaven, or you are a bad boy and forever and ever you will suffer in hell. I mean, naturally you start to develop a bit distaste for that. And usually the word God is a bit tainted by all that. But if we can put aside that aspect of it, you can also perfectly well approach on that Western traditional devotional approach. If religion doesn't become a rigid structure full of morality, you have to do this, you don't do that, you get rewarded, you get punished. But if your belief system helps you to open to your heart and connect with that divinity, it's perfectly valid. A Christian who believes that his sins are forgiven because Jesus died 2,000 years ago on the cross for him, if that helps him to relax and open the heart and connect with divinity, then that belief is perfectly valid. But if he doesn't know anything better to do but to try to prove everybody else who doesn't believe that they are going to suffer in hell, then it's a bunch of terrible bullshit. I mean, who can believe such crap? All these belief systems, if they help the people to connect, they are perfectly valid. If they are not, after that, used to fight with each other. I know I'm right, you're wrong, I know better, blah, 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 and create all the religious fights. Doesn't matter what one believes or not believes. If that belief helps to open, to connect, then it's perfectly valid. What is your name? When he's confronting him, apparently on the mountain in the burning bush, he asks for God's name. And God answers, I am that I am. If you accept that divine name and you contemplate on that, you are right back to self-inquiry. Self-inquiry is not the question, who am I, 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 trying to eventually understand, to know what I am. Never, you will never know it. Mind can never know it. It's just one way of catching the attention, detaching it from all the crazy things we are busy with, and bringing it back to that sense of presence. And then it more changes from the who am I in that simple sense of I am, I am. That is God's name in the Old Testament. I am. I am that I am.